We could talk about your first book just briefly. It's your debut collection, right?
Yes.
And just wondering why choose to make historical concerns the crux of your debut collection as a poet.
Oh, I guess there's one very practical one in which I was actually coming back from having done like a history bachelor's and master's consecutively. So I was in that space of historical inquiry. So I was thinking about academic history. I enjoyed it. I was good at it, I guess. And then, and I sort of had done a thesis and everything. And it was kind of like entering the poetry world. That was my sort of bridge from the world of history to the world of poetry. And I started thinking about what can you use poetry to talk about? How can you use poetry to talk about history to illuminate it in ways that academia can't? So that is, in some ways, where the book is situated.
There's a poem in the collection about the race riots, right? In 21st July 1964.
Yes.
So how is it to write a poem about an event with such like historical gravity, with like lives lost and political implications?
It was not that difficult in a way because the entry point was my own family. Because it really started off with the story that my grandpa told me, that basically during the race riots he lived nearby. He was like in Kallang area, which is actually where I started. Yeah, Kallang Geylang area, and the kampong was there. So he basically fled with my mom in his arms because she was a toddler then. So just running away, and then I believe then he sheltered with a family, a Malay family actually, in another kampong, something like that. Yeah. And so that is the central thread that goes through that sequence of poems. And it's helps because in some ways the book also tries to like tie different levels of history together, right? Of time. So there's like national history, and like there's family history, there's like global geographic history. And so that it was trying to tie my family's history to like a national historical event.
So was Last Rites inspired by an actual event?
Last Rites is the last poem, right?
Yeah,
of the book. Last Rites, it is a bit about NS, I think. Yeah. So partly there's some NS experience. I don't know if I would have ended the book on the same sequence now. Yeah, it was kind of a last minute choice. Maybe one that I'm not the most happy with. I don't think it sets the right tone, but to end the book on. But yeah, I mean, it's there.
I did think it mirrored the poem that opened the collection quite nicely though, because the poem that opens the collection kind of gives you that juxtaposition of like really grand historical events and also like really minute events, right? And then in Last Rites, it's also like just suddenly just zooming in on a very possibly historically insignificant event like the death of someone, but in the context of an actual person, right, he would experience it in a huge way, for example. Yeah. So I think it mirrored the opening quite well, in my opinion.
That's great. I love the retrospective coherence that you are imposing on it. But it's great because, I mean, to be honest, I think I would have done that poem differently. But I mean, yeah.
So which period in history fascinates you the most? I know I'm also like history obsessed though.
Yes, you are. I studied the Renaissance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they studied the Renaissance. Particularly like Renaissance philosophy and art in Europe and around Europe. So that was where I started off on. But actually, if you ask me now what I'm really interested in, I guess I've always been very interested in like Singapore's history and history of the region. Yeah. So that's always been my speciality. Even from before that. It's just that because I was in the UK, there weren't really experts doing it, so I didn't really specialize in it. So it didn't make sense. So that's one. Chinese history is interesting to me as well, but I'm generally quite interested in most forms of history.
And that fascination with Singapore's history is something I also picked up on in 我师承我街道, the Chinese book. Okay, yeah, because you talk about the history of Potong Pasir, right? And I think you were doing some research while writing that, and you discovered new things. I can't remember what was it. Yeah. Right. So, can you remember what new things you learned about Potong Pasir?
No, but firstly, I'm amazed. Do you read it in Chinese?
Yes.
Oh wow!
I bought the book.
Your Chinese must be very good. Because I mean, I say that because I didn't write it in Chinese, so it was translated from Chinese to English. Yeah. But secondly, it's in Fanti, it's in traditional Chinese script. So I'm amazed you read it. I have not read it myself in Chinese, or at least not in Fanti. So well done. The book, the piece you talk about is about the neighborhood that I live in now, Potong Pasir, and basically it tries to construct a sort of local history of it, but not in like a coherent narrative. It's basically like vignettes of like local history. So there's like stuff about the floods in Potong Pasir, because it used to get flooded all the time. I don't know why it's not flooded now.
People drowning in like quarries or something.
Yeah. So people used to drown in the because it used to be a quarry, then it became disused. Then basically disused quarries, when there's rain and flooding, it becomes a huge pond. That's why the vegetables grew so well there. So these vegetable farms and markets there. But also why people drown there all the time, which is quite sad. So it's about trying to construct this local history, but not in a didactic or narrative sort of way, but more like little snippets, which are kind of like which you might not know about.
You talked about this temple in Yishun that has like a Tapogong and some other deity, right? From another folk religion. So also in, I think, Anything About Human, there's a poem about folk religion, justifying something about folk religion, right? So is it something you've been interested in recently?
In A Book of Changes. Religion, yes. I mean, religion, I two things I'm interested in about religion. One is like kind of like informal and syncretic practice of religion. Recently, I've been very inspired by it because I actually went on a tour around the Little India area last year, and basically we were visiting what we call informal shrines. So they're not temples, but they're like basically like roadside shrines that people set up, and in some ways these shrines reflect the community that they serve. So you would have Ganesh, but you also have Wan Yin. You might have a Thai god, and it's like very cool. To me, it's like super interesting that these things are just there. And it also, I think, points to the fact that Singapore is actually a deeply religious place. There's a lot of religious energy about, honestly. Like, people really do believe in these things. And like large or very significant and like venerable trees will attract shrines, like quite naturally. So I think I'm fascinated by this informal practice of religion, more so than the organized type, simply because it's less explored. And really reveals a side of Singapore that you wouldn't think would exist if you were just an outsider to it, or even if you lived here for a long time, if you don't like look at it. But actually, super interesting.
We talked about venerable trees. I thought of this one tree in Toa Payoh that's really huge, and there's a shrine there. I think when I grew up, and I used to go there with my family quite often. My dad would tell me about it being like a religious place or something. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it's funny how they are like kind of a way. I don't know if there's the right word, but it's in a way quite democratic, because or populist, because they kind of like pop up and are maintained and kind of ebb and flow as people believe and disbelieve and buy into what these energies are, and that's how they set up shrines. So it's kind of like weird. It's almost like a spiritual map of the city. So I kind of love the idea. I would love to write about it more one day, actually.